and welcome to my channel where I make dishes inspired by some of my favorite video game characters. Today's dish is inspired by Roxas from the Kingdom Hearts series. I think I've mentioned this before, but Kingdom Hearts 2 was the first Kingdom Hearts game I played. I remember being really confused when I started the game and I was playing as Roxas, not because I was used to Sora, but just because Roxas wasn't the character shown in all of the commercials I had watched. I was really surprised while starting the game as Roxas because in my young brain, all of the commercials showed fun and happy Disney worlds, and yet Roxas's story was emotional, dark, and heart-wrenching. But to me, this wasn't a bad thing, it was a great thing. The game gripped me like no other game had before, and I found myself not just wanting to play it a lot, but thinking about the story and characters a lot when I was at school or playing sports. I became literally obsessed with this game, which ultimately led to my love for video games in general, and honestly, Roxas has a big role in that. Like I said, his story was so emotional and thought-provoking. Seeing the facade of a joyful summer with friends turn into an existential nightmare, and seeing such a young teenager having to sacrifice himself for the life of someone who he had never met, was insane to my little brain. I remember being wrecked to my core that I had become so attached to Roxas in just a few short hours and had to say goodbye to him to meet Sora, and it was only the prologue. I was like, if this is how the game starts, what will even happen next? Anyways, I love Roxas as a character throughout the series because he is so selfless yet relatable and realistic. We can see ourselves in him in his own confusion and outbursts of anger, as well as the happy times like spending time with his friends. We all have a little bit of an edgy and emo side to ourselves, but can love the joy of simple things like ice cream. I think Jesse McCartney does such a good job of expressing all of Roxas's emotions throughout the series and bringing so much life to the character. Roxas has such an amazing theme song and battle theme, with sick keyblades to boot, and I'm so relieved for him that he finally has a chance to be his own person. Now, how can I make a dish for Roxas without mentioning his iconic attachment to sea salt and sea salt ice cream? Who else will he have ice cream with? Now, I've already made my own version of sea salt ice cream on this channel, so I couldn't just make that again, but I knew I had to use sea salt as an element in some way, whether it was a savory or sweet dish. It actually took me a long time to come up with a dish for Roxas because honestly, I kept throwing out plenty of ideas, but none of them really seemed to fit him super well to me. I finally remembered how in the beginning of Kingdom Hearts 2, Roxas, Hayner, Pence, and Olette spend a day working odd jobs to save money up for the trip to the beach. While they're discussing how much they need to raise up, they set aside some money for snacks, which they decide to be pretzels. Luckily for me, salt is a pretty iconic component of pretzels. The last element I included was a rich chocolate ganache coating on top because I wanted some nice and dark contrast to the light salt and lighter pretzels, and of course, chocolate and sea salt also go quite well together. So ultimately, we're making these sea salt chocolate soft pretzels to dig into that are so good, Roxas would smile and say, "You make a good pretzel." Here's what you'll need to make your own. For the pretzels themselves, you'll need active dry yeast, light brown sugar, warm water, unsalted butter, salt, all-purpose flour, and coarse sea salt. For the baking soda bath, you'll need baking soda and more water. Lastly, for the chocolate ganache, you'll need semi-sweet chocolate and heavy cream. For clarification, I made a batch of this ganache and realized I made way too much for the pretzels, so you'll see me making this double batch, but the recipe document has been corrected and you'll hear me saying the correct measurements, even if it doesn't quite line up with what I'm doing on screen. Also for the ganache, preferably it's best to use a chocolate bar instead of chocolate chips. If you use chocolate chips, you might not get as smooth of a finish on your ganache. Anyways, to start the whole process, we'll begin making our pretzel dough. In a large bowl, we'll add in 2 1/4 teaspoons of active dry yeast, or 1 packet, as well as 1 tablespoon of light brown sugar and 1 1/2 cups of warm water that's around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. We'll briefly whisk all 3 ingredients together until they're combined, then cover with some plastic wrap and allow the mix to sit for about 1 minute. This is a perfect time to melt your butter, so melt 1 tablespoon of unsalted butter and allow it to cool slightly before using. After the yeast is nice and activated, uncover the bowl and add your slightly cooled butter as well as 1 teaspoon of salt. Whisk again, and then add in 3 cups of all-purpose flour. Instead of a whisk now, you'll stir with a wooden spoon until the dough is combined with no large clumps of flour. You'll then add in another 3/4 cup of flour and mix again until the dough becomes more tacky and starts to slightly unstick from the bowl. If it's still way too sticky, add in a little bit more flour, about a tablespoon at a time, until the dough is finally ready to knead. It'll be ready when it bounces back slightly to the touch, and it's okay if it's still quite tacky. This should improve as you knead. We'll then flour a working surface and turn our dough out on top. We'll knead the dough for a few minutes, adding small bits of flour as needed until the dough becomes more soft and slowly bounces back to the touch or passes the window pane test. Also, you can definitely mix the dough and knead the dough in a stand mixer if you'd like. Once your dough is finally done kneading, form the dough into a ball and add it to a medium bowl. You'll cover the dough with a slightly damp towel and let the bowl rest for around 20 to 30 minutes. Towards the end of the dough's resting period, start preparing your baking soda bath for the pretzels. This is what will give them that chewy texture and beautiful brown color later. To prep the bath, fill a large pot with 9 cups of water and a half cup of baking soda. Quickly stir the water and then start heating the pot on high until it's boiling. You don't have to cover the pot with a lid as it heats, but if you do like me, it will reach boiling just slightly faster. As your pot heats, start preheating your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit and line 2 baking sheets with either silicone baking mats or parchment paper. Just note that if you are using parchment paper, you should also spray the parchment paper with baking spray. Once your dough is finished resting, we'll use a kitchen scale to separate the dough out into 12 equal sections. Of course, use some flour sparingly if needed if the dough is still a little bit sticky. With each of your 12 sections of dough, you'll roll it out into a long rope of dough that is about 20 to 22 inches long. You can roll with your hands or even stretch it out by carefully bouncing the dough like a little jump rope. Once the dough is long enough, twist the dough into a pretzel shape and make sure to press down on the edges of the pretzels so that they don't become detached. Set each pretzel aside and repeat with all remaining dough balls. Once all pretzels are shaped and your baking soda bath is boiling, working 1 or 2 pretzels at a time, you'll drop the pretzels inside the bath and allow it to soak for 20 to 30 seconds. After 20 to 30 seconds, use a slotted spoon to remove the pretzels, let the excess water drip off, and then place onto your prepared baking sheet. Repeat the bathing process with all of your pretzels, and then you can slide the pretzels into the oven to bake for 12 to 15 minutes until the pretzels have become a beautiful dark golden brown. You can then remove the pretzels from the oven and transfer the pretzels to a cooling rack to cool completely. Now while the pretzels are baking, we'll start on the chocolate ganache. Chop 4 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate into smaller pieces and then put this chocolate into a heat-safe bowl. The size of the pieces don't need to be exact, but we don't want the pieces to be too big because then it'll be harder to get them to melt. When the chocolate is fully chopped, you'll add a half cup of heavy cream to a small saucepan and heat it on medium heat until it starts to simmer, which will take around 5 minutes. As soon as the cream is simmering, remove the pan from the heat and pour the warm cream into the bowl of chocolate. Allow the cream and chocolate to sit undisturbed for 2 to 3 minutes, and then you can mix and stir the two together with a metal spoon until they are beautifully smooth. Once the pretzels are cooled and the ganache has come together, we've come to our last big step. One at a time, dip the top of the pretzels into the ganache and then place onto a serving plate or tray. Sprinkle some coarse salt on the top of the chocolate pretzel and repeat with all remaining pretzels. With that, you're all ready to dig in. These pretzels are so worth it to make. I absolutely adore the soft inside of the pretzels next to the slightly crunchy and chewy exterior. There's this perfect balance between the indulgent sweetness of the chocolate and the sea salt on top that is a perfect cycle in each bite. These pretzels fill that itch I get for soft pretzels from inside of the mall that we all frequented as kids, and in that way there's also so much room for customization. You can omit the chocolate and just make standard salted pretzels, or you could go with my favorite, the cinnamon sugar pretzel, and you could play around with any dips or any toppings of your choice. Either way, Roxas would love sinking his teeth into these pretzels. The countless hours bouncing a ball in the air, hanging up flyers, and knocking a cart up a hill would feel so worth it after trading his money for this delectable treat. Roxas would have such good memories of finally snacking on these with Hainer, Pence, and Olette that he'd of course have to introduce them to Axel and Shion. They would be such a perfect complement to sea salt ice cream, and on a relaxing day, the trio might have some fun making their own from scratch. It might seem dramatic, but these pretzels would fill him with so many emotions of not only his life and memories living in a fabricated twilight town, but his time in the world that never was. Just like these pretzels, not every moment has been completely sweet, as there have been plenty of salty and bitter moments, but with each twist and turn, he's become the person, not nobody, that he is today, and he wouldn't take back a thing. The recipe card is in the video description if you'd like a more quick and concise version to give it a try. Like if you want a bite, subscribe for more geeky treats, and comment what foods Roxas reminds you of. Thanks for following along.